Welcome to Raising a Beautiful Mind, the podcast where we have real conversations about youth mental health to empower families and transform systems. And on this week's episode, Isreal and Jennifer, mental health advocates. All right, welcome back to another episode of Raising a Beautiful Mind. This week we have such an amazing guests. We don't have just one, we have two. We have Jennifer, who is a parent of a child with some mental health needs, and we have Isreal, a 17-year-old that is willing to spend some time with us. So welcome both of you. Really excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. So why don't we just start? Why don't you just tell us a little bit? Why don't each of you just kind of introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about yourselves?
All right. So I'm Jennifer and parent to one child, Israel. And I'm also a clinical social worker. Um, and we live in South Carolina. We live a pretty typical, I would say, used to live a pretty typical normal life of private school, both of us working, um, all the things, soccer, all the normal experiences. And then at about age 6, Israel was diagnosed with a pediatric onset of bipolar disorder. And so slowly, I guess over time, things changed and it looks very, very different than what I thought it was going to look like as we were raising a child.
Okay, and we'll dive into that a little bit more in just a couple minutes. But Israel, do you want to introduce yourself? Do you want to say anything?
Uh, I'm Israel. I don't really know what to say.
What do you
He's
like
a,
to
he's a little
That's
shy.
that's okay. Do you
Uh,
want to tell us like what you like to do for fun?
I have a lot of hobbies. I like to skateboard. I like to play bass guitar. I like to cook, draw, paint. I like to go outside a lot too.
Wow, you're really busy. Okay, we gotta go back to some of that. Cooking. Tell us about cooking. What do you like to cook?
Uh, I cook really good pork. And mostly meats. But I'm trying to learn how to cook more vegetables. So,
What's your favorite thing to cook though? Is it meat? Is it pork, like a pork tenderloin, a pork chop?
uh, actually, it's probably shrimp is my favorite to cook, but everyone likes the pork I make. So
So, Jen, you're eating really well that you have such a gourmet chef in the house.
Yeah, he had no interest in cooking whatsoever, like none. And actually, he had has a lot of sensory sensitivities, just oral sensitivities. Um, and just as a more, I don't like to say picky eater, because I feel like that's really unfair,
Sure.
to say that he's picky, but just very selective and very sensitive to foods. And then all of a sudden, one day, he literally just one day started cooking, and then what he made was amazing, like absolutely amazing. It was like restaurant quality, and it's been relatively within the last year that he's been doing that. And so he's just kind of taken off. He went from absolutely no experience in the kitchen to literally the first thing that he was making was absolutely fabulous.
Wow. So what you're saying is I need to come over for dinner sometime, is what I'm hearing. That's awesome. And then bass guitar, is that what you said you like to do
yeah.
too? How'd you get started with that?
I got it for Christmas because I just saw. I don't know. It just looked cool.
This
So
last year you just got it?
yeah,
Okay.
He
Wow.
had a friend of ours bought him his first ukulele, just off of Amazon, had sent it to him. And we had the opportunity to take a few lessons through a homeschool co-op.
Okay.
And he picked it up really quickly. And I think just really enjoyed it. Started looking at YouTube videos. Then I got him another ukulele and kind of upgraded a little bit. And then he continued on, but the bass guitar still has 4 strings, I guess, just like the ukulele. So he just kind of graduated,
Yeah.
and has just been slowly teaching himself and picks it up really, really quickly and really well.
Wow. So Israel, have you always been so gifted? You have all of these things that you're learning so quickly, you're learning on your own. Has that always been, you feel like you've always been able to Because I personally, you could hand it to me with YouTube and a step-by-step instruction, and it is not going to happen. So, have you always been really talented like that?
Uh, I don't know. I'm good at following directions. Cause I think Legos helps following directions.
Yeah. Well, I think it probably is more than following directions. It's not every day that I have a gifted guest on the show, so I really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
It's like, actually, I consider it kind of almost like his superpower, that
Mhm,
whatever he's focused on
mhm.
and what his interest in, if he is passionate about it and he loves it, especially the more artistic that it is, then the more, like, he just has this aptitude, but he also works really, really hard at it. So it's not that it necessarily comes naturally, but his passion for it and his hyper focused ability means that he's able to really just kind of progress and move through things with all the things that he's interested in and loves to do.
Well, you clearly are a gift, though. I'm beyond impressed. So, what do you think you want to do one day with all of these talents that you have?
Uh,
Be a
it's
professional
weird.
chef that plays bass guitar in a
What
fancy restaurant?
I think it's weird because what I want to do doesn't really, it's not that artistic. I want to be a massage therapist or maybe a chef. So, yeah.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot of different talents, gifts, and skills. So you will be able to do and succeed at whatever you choose. That's awesome. So I know, Jen, you and I, when we have been communicating, mental health is a huge passion of yours. Can you talk about how that came to be? And we have several things that I know you're involved with that we'll talk about in a bit. But how did you get to this space where mental health is such a huge thing in your life?
So, um, I was before he was even born. I've been a clinical social worker for over 2 decades now. And I had been in a variety of settings. So I was in a community mental health setting that I practiced in. Then I was in a hospice setting, so medical social work and home health. Kind of returned back, did a medical practice where I was a provider there through mental health services. And during that time, and I saw a little bit of everything. So any patient that came through that was having, some sort of mental health issue, they would be referred to me, and we would see where I needed to send them or what if I could work with them. Um, but at that time, he was about 5, 6 years old. So simultaneously, he was experiencing some signs and symptoms of some mental health issues
Mhm,
that originally we thought um, was ADHD.
mhm,
Because I don't know, I guess it never occurred to me that was anything more than that.
mhm.
He was very busy all the time, very active. People would comment on how much energy that he had. He was very talkative and social in his class. So I just thought, okay, it must be ADHD. And we did the thing that parents do, and we went to his doctor and got medication and everything for that. But over time, it became apparent that there were other things that were happening, that maybe was beyond ADHD. And so, because I was fortunate enough to work in a field where I have access to resources and information, the more that I learned about him and the more that I learned about what his needs were, the more I was able to focus all of my continuing education, all of my reading, all of that was sort of directed more for to be a better parent to him. But then as a clinician, I can't erase the knowledge that I have. And so it was like, okay, I have it. So obviously, I'm going to bring it back to whatever practice setting that I'm in. And so that's kind of where the passion was directed for mood disorders in general, was because it started out that I was just a parent, like any other parent. And then just bringing it back to the community that I was in.
Yeah. Wow. That's powerful. It's a powerful story. So mental health's really important to me too. That's why we have this whole show. At 12 years old, I started to have my first suicidal thoughts. I, as an adult, have depression and anxiety and ADHD and probably a whole bunch of other things. One day I always say I'll donate my brain to science and they'll open it up and be like, whoa, there's all this stuff here. And I go to therapy and I take meds and I will for the rest of my life. And I don't apologize for it. Just like if I had asthma or diabetes or any other medical condition, it's a medical condition that none of us decide. We wake up one day and go, oh, this will be fun. Like, let's do this. So I'm curious because I know mental health is so stigmatized, where in our world, people don't necessarily, if you have asthma, they don't go, oh, you have an inhaler? What? But mental health, people act weird about it sometimes. So I'm curious for both of you, what has your experience been with mental health, in terms of challenges you might see, in the world and maybe a school setting or just experiences that you've had? Have you had it better than me? Because I find now people are a little more willing to have conversations and a little more understanding, but it didn't start that way. What's your experience?
So I will let you take over on this question because you have a lot to say often about schools in your experience in school settings. Remember that we name no names. I always say like don't out
Oh yeah.
teachers, don't out schools.
Yeah, no.
But just as his general experience. For me, it was, I don't know if awkward is the right word or frustrating or all of those things. Because I was a provider in this community in a medical setting, I saw children who were in the district that I worked in, who I knew had mental health diagnoses, and I would be coordinating with the school system and with the educators. And I felt like I had, I don't know, a good relationship, working relationship with them. Um, so I was under the impression that when my own child was experiencing this, that what we would do is present them with all of the information that we have from the psychologist, from the psychiatrist, from the therapist, and that they would want to work with us and
Mhm.
that they would partner with us.
Yeah, that
And
seems
that
fair.
I felt like I was handing him over on a silver platter because we had all of the information, we had all of the resources
Mhm.
that were lined up.
Mhm.
And my expectation was that they would be, I don't know, thankful is not the right word for it, but just partnership with
Right.
us genuinely. And that was not our experience.
Oh.
It was more of we don't accept outside psychologists. We would like to do our own testing, which was fine.
Mhm.
Um, and not a willingness to do accommodations like a 504 or an IEP, despite the fact that there were some serious things that were happening. And so, very early on, for things that were symptoms, he was getting suspended even as a 6-year-old, put in with middle schoolers
Mhm.
in school suspension, which did not bother him
Mhm.
at all. Because his first time it was like, they thought he was so cute. The middle schoolers, they're like, "Oh, what are you in for?" And he's like, "I had a candy bar." And so it was just
The
like, or I hugged
audacity
a
of it all.
friend.
Mhm.
And they were things that were more like grandiosity and mania. Um, but it just looked like from a school perspective that there was this precocious, maybe naughty little boy whose parents weren't maybe stern or firm enough at
Mhm.
home, which
Mhm.
wasn't what was happening.
Mhm.
And I kept saying, I think this is a medical issue.
Mhm.
And so thankfully, though, he had, I will say, a teacher that he really did love, who was kind of a cushion, but the administrators were not very open to accommodations. And then he had an assistant in his classroom that was also not very accommodating either. And Israel, you have some thoughts on your school.
I don't remember that much.
What about as you got older?
Middle school, yeah.
What was middle school like?
Mostly just people not believing, like, in stuff. Like, when I cried, they would say, like, I was faking it a lot. Um, that's mostly it. Or they just bullied me for crying.
Mm, that's really tough. Doesn't sound like you had a fun school experience.
No.
Minus one teacher, maybe, that was a good support.
Yeah.
I think the thing that was hard was most of his episodes weren't grandiose, they weren't manic. Because when he experiences mania, some children experience it to where it's like irritability.
Mm-hmm.
And for him, he was truly happy when
Yeah.
he was. So there was that cushion that he had. But most of his symptoms, most of his episodes were major depressive episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And because children often rapid cycle many, many, many times throughout the day, um, he could be fine and then he would become severely depressed. And then he'd be fine and then he could be severely depressed.
Mm-hmm.
So from adult point of views, from educators at the school, from staff, it just looked like, well, he's fine when he wants to be.
Mm.
So they didn't really understand. And I was available to educate them. Tried many long emails. It just wasn't sinking in. It wasn't quite as effective as what I wish it could have been like. And then the other part was kids would wonder, even some of his very good friends, because he wasn't, when he was much younger in elementary school, he was very popular with a lot of he had a lot of friends. That wasn't the social part wasn't an issue for him, but they'd want to know, like, well, why are you crying? What's going on? And teachers would say, don't tell them and in fact, he was forbidden from saying that he had anxiety or depression or bipolar. So that was probably the first part of the stigma, was that other people telling him, you're not allowed to say what's going on with you.
Wow. Yeah. So both of you have said amazing stuff. I have so many questions. We're going to be here for the next 7 hours. I hope that's okay because I got a lot I want to talk about. One of the things that you just mentioned was Israel getting in trouble and people saying you can control it, that you can do I've seen you do this. And I liken that. I wonder if you can relate to this, Israel. With my ADHD, I can do some things, but sometimes it's really, really hard. And so things that, like, if I have to read something and sustain for a long time, it takes all of my energy and it totally wipes me out. It doesn't mean that I can't do it, but just sometimes certain things, while I can do them, it can be really, really hard to do it. And sometimes that's my emotions too, controlling how I'm feeling. Like sometimes and it's not like I'm not trying. I'm trying. It's hard it's like how I couldn't just control, like, if I had diabetes and my insulin and my blood sugar, I couldn't just control it because I wanted to. Can you relate to any of that? So, Israel, for me, ADHD, like, you can sometimes control some things, but it's a lot harder than people realize. And sometimes you just can't, like, any more than you could control getting the flu or,
Mental stuff I have is like that.
yeah,
Uh, because you can't really control any of it. Um,
right.
I don't.
Yeah, I think you only have X amount of energy. And then once that's gone, there's no more reserve. There's no more, you can't pull out of it. You can't just snap out of it. It's like, it's just gone. Or I have a friend who says, she uses the term available. Like either he's available to learn, he's available to be
Wow.
open and communicative, or he's not. And it's
Mhm.
not on purpose. It's there's
Right.
just nothing, like he's just trying to concentrate on being able to survive like each moment, each next step thing.
Yeah.
So it can become very difficult to follow directions, to listen, to take care of himself. But in reality, they're just doing the best they can
Yeah.
in that very moment. But I do recognize how confusing that must be to other people when they've seen you the day before or
My friends.
yeah.
Like I'll be with my friends and then I'll get maybe tired and then I'll just very quickly become sad
Mhm.
and I won't remember like how to even pretend to be happy.
Mm.
So yeah.
I think that makes sense, and it's really heartbreaking when you think about it, because I think schools, law enforcement, justice, I mean, all these things where we don't penalize people that have asthma, they can't control that. We don't penalize people that, have diabetes, and maybe you can't run that day, you can't keep up. Our bodies work in different ways, and just because we can't see something, we have to remember that still is the reality. So I appreciate you sharing that. The other thing that you said that I love, because it's just so important to remember, is you said, Jen, when you were referring to some of the behaviors, that they were symptoms, not
Mhm.
behaviors. Can you talk more about that?
Yes. So, my colleague and very good friend, Elizabeth Erico, um, we believe very strongly at the Children's Mental Health Resource Center that these are symptoms, not behaviors. We look at behaviors. If you look up the actual definition of behavior, ultimately you get to that behavior is a choice. It's willful or it's purposeful. And things that seem like their behaviors, like irritability or sadness, right? Putting your head down on your desk, um, maybe the inability to be receptive to trying difficult and challenging things at school, like math or reading, um, even things that are maybe appear as if they're oppositional or defiant.
Mhm.
Um, those are clues, those are signs or symptoms that maybe there's something else that's happening. And so and symptoms are not willful choices.
Mhm.
They are Symptoms are observable, physiological, and biological um, things that are happening within the body that we have no control of at that time.
I love it. And that's so right. And I think when we're thinking about behaviors, one of the things I like to encourage people to do is to replace the word behavior with symptom, because I think sometimes when we do that, we tend to react and respond in different ways than we would do if we use the word behavior. I like that a lot. You guys have both mentioned a quick rundown on what that is and what that means to you, for especially for folks that aren't familiar with bipolar.
Well, Israel, do you want to start with like what your understanding of bipolar is before I give my definition?
I think it's uh,
Mhm.
balance. I think your mood will change really fast, really suddenly. I would
How do you experience it though?
like that.
Like
Like
that, yeah. You do. Yeah. Your mood goes kind of it changes very suddenly, very
like in
rapidly.
depression. I think for some people it can be anger, like anger more.
Mhm. So he had mentioned his hypothalamus, which is absolutely true for him. Um, and so what I have come to know as bipolar over the years may be different from how other people conceptualize bipolar. And that's just based off of all the reading that I have done as a parent. So I really conceptualize bipolar disorder as an energy disorder. And of course, as you know, extremes of go from high highs to what would be mania, and all the symptoms of mania, which can be flight of ideas, lack of sleep, some grandiosity. So there's some things that go with mania, hyper focused, um, and then the low lows, which is mostly what he experiences, but not everybody's like him, which is depression to the point where sometimes he can't even get out of bed. And so even at 6, which was his first major depressive episode, and that was what really clued us in something was happening. He could not get out of bed. Every cell in his body hurt. If he was awake, he was crying, he was sobbing. He was complaining that he was a somatic complaints that his head was hurting. Also very existential. He was kind of like fearful of dying, didn't want to die, but could never remember a time where he had ever been happy, and could not even imagine a time where he would be ever happy again. And this happened like overnight. The previous night, he was super happy. And then the very next day, it was the complete opposite of that. And he was in bed for about 2 weeks. We had called the pediatrician. We had to carry him to the pediatrician's office because he couldn't even really walk. He could barely eat. He was barely drinking. We were getting tea and different ways to hydrate him. And the pediatrician saw him and was like, yep, that's depression. And they do what people do when you see depression, and gave him, put him on, prescribed an SSRI. And within hours, I mean, literally hours, he was happy. And so for me, when I think of bipolar, I do think of those extremes of like being extremely energized, having all these flights of ideas. And then his speech gets really takes off and goes super fast. It's hard to get a word in edgewise. And then, of course, those lows. But there are people, and he does occasionally experience that, what we call mixed mood episodes, where they can be superimposed with each other. So he can be having hypomania or mania while he's experiencing depression. And so that can come off as more irritability.
Yeah. And that's a big sign for a lot of things that people don't realize. You know, they think, I'm not sure how people always think mental health is going to present itself, but irritability and sleep tend to be the ones that people can be more of red flags. So one of the things as you were talking that I started to think about is for parents, especially under the age of 18, and I know Israel, you're almost 18, right? Soon sometime.
17 and a half.
17 and a half.
Yeah.
There's a hard time getting a diagnosis. A lot of professionals will say we don't diagnose until 18, because apparently at 18 it's magical, like the whole world changes. And at 18, then when they become legal adults, then you can start to try to advocate for them. What was your experience getting the diagnosis, but even more importantly, with your own professional and personal experience? There's a lot of parents that might be listening that's where they're at right now. Like, we can't get a diagnosis. We don't know what to do. Things feel, kind of off the rails. And we just know that if we can get our kiddo help, then they can start to thrive.
So I don't think that our experience, to be quite honest, is typical.
Okay.
So I want to preface that for anybody who's out there listening to our story as a family, because when he first got diagnosed, he was 5 with ADHD. We took him to the pediatrician. Then again, when he was experiencing depression, so at that time he had a stimulant on board and he had an antidepressant on board. I had no idea what was about to happen, but it was happening. Um, I This is just a weird coincidence. I had suspected that he had dyslexia,
Okay.
and just pure coincidence. My husband and I, we agreed that we wanted this assessed because reading is such a cornerstone to education.
Yeah.
It wasn't a thought about bipolar. It wasn't even a thought about
Mhm.
ADHD. It wasn't the reason why we sought out a psychologist. It was the concern for a reading disorder.
Sure.
So we went and we had a full spectrum psychological evaluation. Truly, like, just an amazing psychologist,
Mhm.
who, before he even began, took him on a tour of the building, had us bring comfortable clothes, comfortable snacks, made sure that in the afternoon we knew to, like, give him a break and lunch and nap and then do testing again. And so it was this whole big process that lasted a couple of days. Um, and from a clinical social work standpoint, I mean, certainly I had referred people
Mhm.
to psychologists before for clinical testing, but going through it as a parent was a little bit different. So it was interesting to see her approach to this. She was very thorough. And I had, when you're going through this process, you're given these questionnaires
Mhm.
that you fill out as parents, that you fill out as teachers. If you have daycare providers, anybody who's involved with the child fills these forms out. I don't know what triggered what, but the end result of that, even before his major depressive episode, she had sat us back down and I said, well, does he have a reading disorder? Is he dyslexic? And she was like, that's probably the least of your concerns.
Mm.
Um, she's like, I think the priority is his mental health. I think he's at high risk for being bipolar. And what she meant was he's bipolar now.
Okay.
That totally went over my head. Like,
Yeah.
did not even register because you don't think that your 6-year old lives with bipolar. Like, that's just not even a thought.
Right.
And so she did us a solid
Mhm.
and she referred us to a psychiatrist that saw children in our area. And she said, whatever you do not miss this appointment. I pulled strings for you to get in to see him.
Wow.
And she's like, there's only 2 in our area that I would trust that are going to be able to help him. And so looking back, I can see, oh, she knew he had
Mhm.
bipolar. But I just, because I thought, no kidding, there's a family history. Like, okay, like when he's 20.
Right.
It never was a thought.
Right.
But in between, while we were still waiting for to get in, because it took months to get in to see the psychiatrist, that's when he had his first major depressive episode. I
Yeah.
still wasn't thinking bipolar. That wasn't even though it
Mm.
had been suggested, was not even a thing that I thought.
Right.
Um, but that was sort of the timeline of, coincidentally, we had seen a psychologist who
Mhm.
had referred us to a psychiatrist. By the time we got into a psychiatrist, the very first thing that he said to us, the very
Mhm.
second, same psychiatrist that we have today. So he's been working with Parker for over 11 years.
Wow.
Um, the very first thing he said to him was, my goodness, how long has this young man been hypomanic? And in that moment was the first moment where I absolutely knew, oh
Mm.
my God, because it was the very moment that he had started taking the antidepressant medication
Mhm.
and that he had been hypomanic and manic the whole summer. And I just thought, oh wow, his ADHD meds really need adjusting.
Yeah.
And even though I'm a clinician,
Yeah.
it just, I think maybe, I don't know, because it was my own child, like I just could not conceptualize
Yeah.
that my 6-year-old was living with mental illness. It's not that I didn't know it couldn't happen to kids, because of course I work with kids.
Yeah.
It was just, I couldn't imagine where we have this life where he's going to this private school and we have like all these friends and he's going to birthday parties and
Yeah.
he's quite popular. Like, I don't know, like, how could that happen to him? Like, it just didn't even seem possible.
Well, and your point on being a professional, I can relate to that very much. It hits different when you are in the circle, right? Because there's the emotion, there's all these pieces that it's then you have a whole different journey of grappling with it because you are a professional. Why didn't I? How come I didn't? All of the questions. So I appreciate, I mean, that is wonderful because you're right. I don't think most people can relate to that as the journey. And a side note, I see a furry creature in here, which I was laughing as you were talking, and probably socially inappropriate time to be laughing, but I saw it, Israel, you lift up the dog. Who's our furry friend, Israel?
His name is River.
Oh, so sweet. So sweet. Because this is a podcast not just for people, also pets. I fully agree. And if he could talk, I'm sure he'd have a lot to say too.
Oh, yeah.
So, Jen, what do you recommend for parents that are they're suspicious of maybe not bipolar, it could be any sorts of things. What do you recommend? Because I know you do this professionally too. What do you tell parents?
So you were right originally when you said like it can be difficult. And interestingly enough, people always go, the DSM, says that children can't be diagnosed, and it doesn't. There's no minimum age. Um, there are flaws in the DSM that I'm concerned about, not just as a clinician, but as a parent. We have noticed, myself and my colleagues, that it's written in an adult language, the symptomology for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what does grandiosity look like in a 6-year-old? Well, for him, that meant that he was wearing a mustache going to school.
Yeah.
And he was like, I'm a 42-year-old man. And, people were paying attention to him, and he liked that attention because that was feeding that grandiosity, right? And as of
Yeah.
course, his teacher was emailing me, like, why didn't you take it off? And I'm like, lady, and she was a great teacher, so I'm not like, she was fine. Really truly, she was a good teacher. But I was thinking, I did my part. I did everything I could to get him to go to school that morning. Like, we're doing good. Like,
Yeah.
he got out the door. All you have to
Pick the
do is tell him to
shells.
take it off. But she
Mhm.
wanted him to be the one to take it off and to recognize that it was inappropriate. And so it was real to you. Yeah. So, and so all day long, kids would be like, you know, why do you have that mustache on? And he was like, I'm a man, I'm 40. And so it was just, that was grandiosity,
Yeah.
but it doesn't look like that to other people.
Sure.
Or when he hopped on, I still to this day cringe. That was like one of the episodes that he got suspended for. And I explained to them it was mania, but it's just not being believed.
Mhm.
And I get it, because if you're not a mental health professional, how it's hard for some people.
Mhm.
He jumped up on the table and he had pencils in between his hands, and he
Yeah.
was like, I'm Wolverine. And that's energy, that's grandiosity, right? That's feeding that need and that
Mhm.
hyper speech that was going in there. And so he looked like he was being mischievous and precocious and naughty, when in fact he was really very, very sick. Yep.
Oh, wait, say that again, Israel. I couldn't catch that.
I got detention for that.
Oh, you did.
I was really surprised too because I didn't think that was detention worthy.
Yeah, I'm sure there's probably a lot of stories that you have like that where it was questionable because sometimes it feels like we become targets when if we have reoccurring things or
I think his, because the intention wasn't, it was just like he had this need, like he had this drive, like every part of his being was like, I've got to do this. Yeah. When he is manic, every, or even hypomanic, every part of him wants to be an entertainer. So that's how his mania comes out. It is not that way for everyone, so it can look differently. And I think his is more like what we would, I don't know if that's fair to say classic, but his lows are very low and his highs are very high.
Sure.
And so for him, like sometimes it feels good, unless it's a mixed mood episode, and then it surely doesn't. But for him, it wasn't a thought that it was dangerous, but from looking at it from a school perspective, you have this kid who jumped up on a table with sharp pencils. Like every part of them was like, this is dangerous. And I'm like, yeah.
I remember thinking it was okay because the sharp end was pointed to my hand, so it was the other, the like eraser end sticking out.
Like
How
it was
old were you when this happened again?
six,
6 or 7.
7. Yeah.
Okay, so you were little. I'm impressed that you even remember that.
It caused a stir. It was,
Yeah.
and he had in-school suspension for the day, and so like all of these incidents were symptoms, they weren't behaviors. And so they kept trying to do consequences and punishments. And I had the vice principal who, as lovely as the teacher was, that vice principal and I did not jive well. And that's primarily because it wasn't that she was looking at it from a behavior standpoint. And that if we only just punished him enough at home, if we just talked to him, something, if we just found the thing that hurt, then he wouldn't have these behaviors. And that just simply wasn't what was happening. And during this time, we were working on medication. As I had said earlier, he had had a ADHD stimulant on board, and then a non-stimulant, and also he had an SSRI. We were only just new when he was 6 to the psychiatrist, so we also had to slowly taper off of those medications.
Sure.
We had to see if responsibly was this medication induced. So if he had not been introduced to those medications, would he still have this energy disruption here?
Yeah.
Would that still be impacting his mood?
Yeah.
And he was also introduced to an antipsychotic medication. So as we were tapering off of one, we were slowly going up on another. So we were trying everything that we could try at home. And despite that, we actually kind of live still, and this does not always happen. That's why like our story is a little bit different. He was still doing year-round soccer at that point. He was still going to having friends and being invited over to places. We were still living our life, despite the fact that we were also managing a mood disorder.
Yeah.
And it did actually go into remission temporarily.
Awesome.
But it was a reprieve because when puberty happened, it hit back hard.
That's a
and
bear,
so,
isn't it?
yeah, but the stuff behind the scenes with the school of trying to get a 504 in place and trying to get an IEP, which we kept getting denied. I was told he's not bipolar enough. I didn't even know what that meant because
I was just going to ask, is that in the DSM-5? Like you have kind of bipolar or not bipolar enough, super bipolar? Like
I was thinking like, wow, he seems pretty bipolar to me. Like, I don't know what that even means. Another administrator was brought in to kind of like soothe me because she was introduced as part of their special education team that and again, they weren't going to give us an IEP, but they had someone from the district come in and they're like, she's a parent of a child who has the same diagnosis. And so she knows. And I'll never forget what she said. She said, Mrs. Savick, I have a child exactly like him. And the thing is that it never gets better. It only gets worse.
well,
And
that's encouraging.
I did not agree with that.
No.
And even on the first day because we switched from a private school to a public school, because I just thought like they'll have more resources for him, like with reading and all the things that he needed. versus like the smaller private Montessori school that we had been to wasn't really sure that they could do that. Um, and even on the first day, like the assistant teacher was like, I have a son exactly like yours, only I know how he doesn't need medication because I know how to parent him. And so there was a lot of judgment, like just even from day one. And it
Wow.
was me try really hard to educate them, I mean, desperately educate them that this was not a well child.
Yeah.
But it was, I don't know. But because he had such like a lovely lead teacher, we
Mhm.
did a public Montessori. Um, and she was with him for 3 years.
Yeah.
I'll give her credit that even though she heavily disagreed with me, and I mean heavily disagreed with me,
Yeah.
she always made sure that he was okay.
Wow. Oh, I can see the emotion. It's such a journey that people don't realize, whether you're the person living it or a parent, for the amount of times we were told if you just discipline. I mean, like, never tried that, hadn't thought of it. Oh, thank you. Now we're going to be
Yep.
better, as if it was that or the person going through it. I would love to know, Israel, if you're willing to share, those times that you had detention or suspended, whether it's in school or out of school or all of that, was that, and I'm asking this as a loaded question on purpose, but was that what you needed at the time? Like, did that make everything better? Did it make it worse? And then what did you need at the time?
I didn't know.
Oh, he didn't know. Like he didn't understand that he was suspended.
Because it was all when you were little.
Um, because the way that the suspensions worked, they were in school suspensions.
Uh-huh.
Yes. So,
Until his detention.
well, yes, that's what you're calling
Oh, gotcha.
detention.
You were told
So
it was detention.
one of my beefs with them too, I mean, just
It was the time that I was at the high the
yeah, um, because it was a preschool through um 8th grade.
Okay.
And so even as a 6-year-old, he was put into in school suspension all day long
Hmm.
with 8th graders, with middle schoolers.
Wait. Say that again. I need,
you
I need to
you
hear that again.
100% heard me right. And
He
so
was in
then
preschool,
he was in kindergarten, first grade. He was in first grade.
kindergarten, first grade,
First
in
grade.
detention with
In
eighth
school
graders.
suspension all day for his mood disorder that we had documentation for that they did not want to accommodate. And I was saying, these are symptoms. His doctor was saying, these are symptoms. His pediatrician was like, these
Yeah.
are symptoms. His therapist, we had a lovely team of resources behind the scenes that were really great. And
Yeah.
all of them supportive and backing us up. And they were like, no, he did the crime. He has to do the time. And that was like a literal quote from the vice principal. Um, and so I was like, but even if this was like purposeful, I still don't think it's a crime. But
Yeah.
yes, he was put in with middle schoolers, and so I would write and I would say like this isn't appropriate. You know, we don't even allow them on the school bus together at the same time. So you're allowing him to be in a room, and they're like, well, there's someone observing him, and it was coming across as me. I don't even know if I'm allowed to say the words, but as like, and the vice principal actually did. I mean, like she called me
Hmm.
the B word, like she just did. Um, and it was me coming across as a very demanding, dramatic, um, parent
All the
that
labels that
was
parents advocating for their kids get. Yep.
great. And so their version of resolving this was they set up our partition, like just like a folding partition. And my thing is like, I am a clinician in this area. I
Yeah.
know you have middle schoolers who are tipping over chairs, who are throwing chairs, using poor, like they were using language that my 6-year-old like I don't want him necessarily overhearing. And he would come home and he told me about this. And
Mhm.
so it was very disturbing to me.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
it was incredibly dismissive on their end, not caring and making me out to be a problematic parent.
well, you've said so many things. At first, I'm very sorry that both of you have had these experiences. Sadly, they're more common than not, and schools have to be very careful. I don't believe that schools go into it trying to also be problematic. They only know what they know. That said, schools are lucky that they don't get sued more because some of those pieces, you're not bipolar enough, not bringing mental health input to the table and making decisions. If you don't have a credentialed person
Oh,
sitting at the
I am
table,
so sorry.
well, there we go. She had to step out for a second. Israel, is there anything that you would want young people to know that are on this journey?
Uh, I don't know that. I mean, it definitely gets better. I think.
Yeah.
Uh, and I used to think, well, that would just never get better, and it does. And you can live like this, and in general, it's just not the worst thing. Like you can live with it and not be in pain all the time. That sounds really sad, but I don't know.
No, that sounds very hopeful. Jen, I had just asked him when you stepped out, I said, is there anything you'd want other young people to know about this journey? And he's blowing me away with it gets better and you don't have to be in pain all the time. And
Yeah,
there's so many
one of the
insightful young
reasons why you want to talk about suspension. You can
You
talk
can.
about suspension. Oh, no, you can go. No, I'm sorry. Suspension.
Well, for me, it was fun a little bit. Well, not the first time. The first time, they just grabbed my arm and started walking, and they didn't even say where they were going with me. And I thought I was going to jail. But then it started to become fun almost because the second time, I had made friends in there, and they were all like older, and we talked a lot,
Mm.
and it was just like it was weird.
Yeah, I never made suspension to be a big deal. And of course, I wasn't going to punish him at home because these were symptoms. So I just, when he came home the first time, I said, so how was it? And he goes, it was fun because it fed his grandiosity.
Yeah.
All the kids were like, what are you in here for?
Well, yeah, because I was like I was the only kid in there.
Little
Yeah,
kid,
little
yeah.
kid. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet. I bet. Well, you two have been through a lot. So I can't believe that our time is almost done, but I want Jen for you to talk about some of the work that you do, palliative parenting. I want to know all about all of these things. And then I know people are going to want to know how they can get involved too and where it's at and how to find out more information.
Yeah, so throughout this journey with him, I um, started to participate in a support group
Mhm.
with other parents who
Wow.
have children who also live with mood disorders and bipolar disorder. And so from there, I was invited to be part of a nonprofit, the Children's Mental Health Resource Center. And what we do is we support parents and professionals.
Mhm.
So those people who are caring for children who live with mood disorders, and also that includes major depression and bipolar disorder, but also there's a phenotype of bipolar called thermoregulation, sleep dysregulation disorder. I may have said that wrong because sometimes I
There's a
get
lot of words.
it's a lot of words, but it's a very specific phenotype that actually he lives with.
Okay.
Um, and so when he mentioned the hypothalamus, that's part of it. Um, but we support families. We have webinars, and for families, we have clinical seminars for professionals. We have support groups that we do. We have a parenting class called palliative parenting, where it's stems from the idea of palliate, which is to decrease, suffering and pain and improving quality of life. Because when I think about what was told to me, that, and I get really tearful that it never gets better. I thought, that's not true. I know it's not true. And for me, as an advocate, I really want other parents to know that there are people out there who get it.
Yes.
And if you're interested in knowing more about our nonprofit, or if you'd like to have me back again or Israel back again, or certainly we can do that.
And we
But
will put all of the links to everything that Jen's talking about in the description for this for this podcast. So if right now as she's talking, you're like, I want to know more, look in the description because we have linked all of the things that she's talking about.
yeah, so it's cmhrc.org. We have our website up. It lists our services. We have a bunch of free resources. I'm really enjoying a book club that we do. So there's a
Nice.
book club that we have where you can purchase the book through us and get some questions ahead of time,
I love
and
that.
then participate in our discussion group that we have. And but I just really want parents to know, and Isreal wants the whole reason why he's agreeable. He likes to do interviews, and that it really does get better.
Yeah.
And there really is a lot of hope out there.
I love that. Now, Jen, if I'm not in South Carolina, can I still access your resources or how does that work?
Yes. Oh, no, thank you. Thank you so much for asking. Yeah, we are a national nonprofit. So whether you are in Hawaii or you are in Florida,
Okay.
and we even have people who participate and they don't live in the United States.
Oh, cool.
So, feel free to access our resources, take a look at the things that we offer, that we really hope, and I hope, and my advocacy, and as we move forward, that we can be a beacon of light to other families and other professionals who really are interested. Because as you said, there's just not enough time to go into all of the myths, and some misinformation about bipolar or its diagnosis, because it absolutely can be diagnosed in children. And if you suspect it, that there are resources and there's help out there.
Yeah, and I'll even add, I'm gonna volunteer you too that folks, I can tell you when you as a parent of a child that has had any mental health needs, Jen's point about like, I really want to help. I want parents to know that they're not alone. She's opening herself up. I'm telling you that no matter where you're at, if you're trying to access things you don't know, this organization and Jen are people that, and you can call me too, but man, they have a ton of stuff that we all want to help because if you have walked it, you do not, it is so challenging. It is so heartbreaking. You don't want any other people. You don't want young people to have to experience it at all. You don't want parents to have to go through it. It's lonely. There's all these things. So definitely reach out, check out their website because they offer so much. And we quite frankly, we need more of it. There's so much out there and there are so many parents that feel so isolated and alone that this is an opportunity not to. So before we totally wrap up here, for each of you, what is one thing that you want other people, whether it's young people or parents, or maybe it's even providers or schools, you want them to remember, you wish that they knew. What is your takeaway that you want people to walk away with?
Ezra, what would you like for maybe schools or for other
Um,
parents to know?
I think there's a thing that I learned as a kid, and it's like do to others what you would have them do to you, and it's just empathy. It's really important when dealing with mental illness and people with mental illness. Uh,
Yeah.
so just to remember to be empathetic and yeah.
Wow. That's powerful. Yeah, that is powerful. Thank you. Jen, what about you?
And many things that if, like just off the top of my head today, that if um, any practitioner, whether you're a psychiatrist or a nurse practitioner or a therapist or whatever your background is, a teacher, a parent, um, that, you know, these behaviors are not willful, they're not purposeful, they are symptoms. And, we can work towards alleviating those symptoms.
Yeah.
There are ways to approach this that helps improve quality of life for
Yeah.
you and for your classroom, your family. There are ways to go about it, and there are knowledgeable people out there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to thank both of you. You're both tremendous mental health advocates, and we are better because we got to share time and space and knowledge with you. I will make sure all of the links to everything we've talked about are in the description. Please don't hesitate to reach out. The resources are there, and people want to help. So thank you both again.